A curfew in Los Angeles after days of protests against government immigration policies. But rallies are spreading across the country, including New York, where more than 80 people were arrested. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. As immigration raids continued across the country, a curfew went into effect Tuesday night in Los Angeles. The protests have now spread coast to coast against the detention and removal of suspected undocumented migrants. Meanwhile, California has gone to court, pushing back against what it calls the Trump administration's illegal use of federal forces to crack down on demonstrators. For more, we turn now to CGTN's Hendrik Seybrandi, who is in Los Angeles. Hendrik, great to see you. What's the latest there? How widespread is the protest, and do federal and local law enforcement now actually outnumber protesters?
Well, good afternoon, Anand. Things are starting to heat up a little bit again this afternoon, as they have over the past couple of days. The crowds were pretty sparse here earlier in the day, but now as the hours go on this afternoon, we are seeing some more protesters lining the street here, Alameda Street, just outside of the Federal Immigration Center. There's a real back and forth between the protesters and federal law enforcement here. Occasionally you'll see those vans, the ICE vans or the Customs and Border Protection vans, pulling into the facility here. When that happens, the crowds really kind of surge. They begin yelling at the folks inside of those vans as they're entering the building, and things do escalate a little bit. We haven't seen anything in the form of tear gas or anything like that, but there is pretty heavy crowd control right now. A lot of crowds sort of swelling into the streets here, and the authorities here are trying to prevent the traffic from being impeded in any way, so people are being told to get back onto the sidewalks. You mentioned that curfew. It will be in effect again for a second night here in Los Angeles. It went into effect at 8 o'clock here last night until 6 this morning. Some 300 plus people were taken into custody and were arrested for curfew violations. We still have some hundreds of National Guardsmen here in the area, along with some 700 U.S. Marines that have been deployed to Southern California. Things still remain tense in the area. Obviously, a lot of Southern California residents remain very unhappy with both the immigration detentions and the arrests that have been made since Friday, and also the federal response to what's been going on here. Lots of LA residents believe that the Trump administration has vastly overreacted to the situation here, that this did not deserve to have the military response that it did, and I imagine that this feeling is going to persist, and the tensions here are going to persist for days to come. Anand?
Right now, Hendrik, California has gone to court against the Trump administration. Where does that case now stand?
Well, there is a hearing scheduled for tomorrow before a federal judge, I believe in San Francisco, who will take up the issue of whether the deployments here, the National Guardsmen and the Marines, whether that was legal or not. Governor Gavin Newsom is saying that this was completely unwarranted, that typically it's a California governor and authorities in the state that will make that decision on whether to call out the National Guard. Something like this has not been done in recent memory. The Trump administration and President Trump, who call this a series of left-wing riots, feel that this was richly deserved. The folks in Southern California and in California, Governor Newsom in particular, who calls this a brazen abuse of power, says this is completely illegal. They're trying to restrict the use of those federal troops strictly to protecting federal buildings, and that's it. Whereas the Trump administration, it seems, wants to use these troops for more than that, for detaining civilians, and in fact some of that has already occurred here on the ground. So a lot is riding on that judge's decision in a federal court in California tomorrow. Anand?
Thanks, Hendrik. That's CGTN's Hendrik Seybrandi reporting from Los Angeles. Well, of course, there's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Jeffrey Swartz is a former prosecutor, defense attorney, and judge. He's currently a Distinguished Professor Emeritus at Cooley Law School. Imani Cheers is a cultural curator and associate professor of digital storytelling at George Washington University. Also with us is Kevin Johnson. He's a distinguished law professor and a professor of Chicana and Chicano studies at the University of California, Davis School of Law. And Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Adolfo, let me start with you. As we just heard from our reporter there, it's mid-afternoon right now in Los Angeles. Crowds are beginning to gather again, and now there are protests all over the country. We heard about the arrests that took place in New York as well. And as we also heard, the National Guard's been deployed in Los Angeles. 700 Marines, U.S. Marines, also on standby. What is going on? Is all of this justified, or is it an overreaction?
I think we are on different planets. You and the reporter and the rest of us are on different planets. These aren't protests, these are riots. They're very clearly riots. Now, a couple of things that your reporter failed to report on is, did you report on the Apple store being looted? Did you see the Nike store? Did you see the violence, the bricks that are being thrown at police, the injuries to police officers, bottles? These aren't protesters. The masks and other type of hardware that's being distributed by agitators, professional or otherwise. These are organized criminal activities and looting at night. The curfew in Los Angeles was called for by the Democrat mayor of Los Angeles. So if it's such a protest, I don't understand why you need to have a curfew. But a couple of other facts here. First, the chief of police of Los Angeles on Sunday before any deployment of troops said his words, "We're overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed. We're being attacked." That was the police chief in Los Angeles that said that. Now, what's happened here is the governor of California and Mayor Bass this is all political at the end of the day, are looking at some interesting polls here. 65% of the American people view this as riots and support what the president is doing. Of that number, 88% are Republicans, 59% are independents, and 37% are Democrats. So Mr. Newsom is looking at polling to become the next nominee of the Democratic Party, and the Democrats are looking at this from their perspective. But these are clearly riots.
All right.
This is out of control. And another thing your reporter didn't say is there was a request, I don't know why you didn't report on this, for an emergency injunction. Were you aware of that? Before Judge Breyer in San Francisco brought by Governor Newsom, and that was rejected.
He did mention that. One of the other things, I mean,
was rejected.
But you talk about polling. I mean, there's also been a YouGov poll that was done where the majority of people are opposed to the deployment of National Guard troops and Marines in California. But I want to get to something else. You talked about California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Yes.
He says this move by the president is a breach of state sovereignty and illegal, and in fact has inflamed tensions. Let's listen to Gavin Newsom.
Yep.
You get these insurgent groups coming in, sort of these anarchists that are in there to create real problems. And they're just playing right into Donald Trump's hand. And they need to be called out. They need to be arrested. It is wrong to destroy other people's property, and it is wrong to create the conditions that only exacerbate this. But Donald Trump, at the end of the day, is the sponsor of these conditions. He's exacerbated the conditions. He's, lit the proverbial match. He's putting fuel on this fire ever since he announced he was taking over the National Guard. An illegal act, an immoral act, an unconstitutional act.
A moral, unconstitutional act, then I guess 30 other times this has been used by presidents, including in Los Angeles by President George H.W. Bush. I guess that was illegal. I guess what President Eisenhower did was illegal. What President Johnson did was illegal. Obviously, the president has the authority under the Resurrection Act to do this, to declare it, and it's quite broad in terms of what can be done. He's also protecting federal officers and federal property. That's what these resources are being deployed to do, and the police can then concentrate on controlling these mobs that, of course, have stopped highways and disrupted life, looted, 400 arrests of violent, illegal immigrants in this country, not undocumented workers, illegals.
Okay, I want to get to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, what do you make of the president deploying troops in Los Angeles, deploying the National Guard? I mean, is he following the law, or is this an overreach in your view?
It is an overreach, but I want to start out with the thought process that protesting is the people speaking to the government. And that means its leaders, in this particular case, Donald Trump and the people around him. When you use unnecessary force, like calling in active duty troops, which are not allowed under the Posse Comitatus Act, and taking the National Guard away from the state to use and use it for yourself as the federal government, you are saying to the people, I'm not listening to you. I don't care what you think. You're going to get what I'm going to give you, and you're going to like it. And that's basically what's happening here. This is a terrible overreach. This does not fit anywhere within the acts which allow the use of the National Guard to be nationalized. There are three of them. An invasion. There is no invasion. An insurrection. If this is an insurrection, I want to hear people tell me that what happened in the Capitol on January 6th was not an insurrection. And interference with the president being able to carry out the laws that he is charged with carrying out. That is federal law. Nothing has happened to do that. And in fact, these troops that have been called in have done nothing. The police in Los Angeles County, Los Angeles City, and the Highway Patrol have taken control of all of this and have in fact controlled the violence to a great degree.
Yeah.
Now, I don't agree with violence, and people should be arrested if they are violent.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, with all of the protests we are going to see between now and Sunday around this country, Donald Trump better start listening.
Okay.
The people who over 85% don't want people who are working and adding to our economy being deported. They don't want children who are American citizens being deported. They don't want families divided up.
Okay, Jeffrey, I want to...
Most of all, they don't want to see, they want to see people who are violent criminals being deported.
Right.
But that's all.
Okay, I want to move on, Jeffrey. I want to move on to...
He's lost that narrative on immigration.
Okay, I want to move to Imani. Cheers. Imani, President Trump has strongly defended the deployment of the National Guard, of these troops in Los Angeles. Let's listen to what the president had to say.
You would have had a horrible situation had I not sent them in. Horrible. You'd be reporting on a lot of death and a lot of destruction that's not going to take place. I think if you look, every night it got less and less. They were met with very strong force, the bad people, the bad, sick people that do what they do. But these are paid people in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases. And they really are, they're agitators. It's usually radical left, and it's usually governors that are Democrat, and they don't want to call them in. They don't want to save lives. They don't want to save property. They don't want to call them in. I don't know what it is. We sent them in, not early, we sent them in late as far as I'm concerned.
So the president also said that it would be great if Governor Newsom were arrested. Now, we've seen these pictures, ICE agents moving around in plain clothes and unmarked cars, sweeping through neighborhoods as well. I mean, what is your view of what is happening in the country?
Oh, well, there's definitely a lot going on. And what I can say for sure is I wish the rhetoric would just be consistent. Because if we have, in this country, we are truly blessed to have the ability to protest. We can use our voice. We all know that there are other places in this world that you cannot have the opportunity to speak your mind about certain issues. And when we see individuals protesting against these ICE raids and the brazen way in which these officers are conducting what is currently, quote unquote, the rule of law, and the reaction as such. And I do have to follow up with my colleague who spoke a moment ago about January 6th. And if we're really talking about insurrectionists, if we're talking about violence, if we're talking about the National Guard and the Marines being deployed for safety, I really wish I would have seen that level of interest a couple of years ago, again, as a Washington, D.C. resident, and I didn't. And so now what I see is the ability to exacerbate issues. Donald Trump doesn't like the pushback that he is getting in certain spaces, so he's coming out forcefully. This is what he said he would do, and I have to keep reminding myself and in my group chats that this is exactly what other people voted for.
Yeah.
I'm a part of the 92% of black women who did not vote for this, but this is what people voted for. And now whether or not they're realizing the repercussions of that vote are coming with the full sweep of individuals who are not criminals, who are not individuals participating in criminal activity. And when we have the ability to mix things up, so we aren't seeing clear lines, so we're seeing the use of force where it possibly was not warranted, we have a problem.
Okay, let's go to Kevin Johnson. Kevin, great to see you. Welcome to the show. Now, there have been hundreds of people who have been deported without access to due process. In many instances, the deportations have taken place in violation of court orders that have been issued. To date, no one has been held accountable for defying those court orders. I mean, is the rule of law being observed here in the United States when it comes to the deportation of some of people?
Well, I think that you raised some very good questions. And the Supreme Court on 3 occasions already has already made clear that due process to all migrants in the United States before they're removed from the country. And now we have a return of a man who was wrongfully deported that the court ordered. Maybe not under the conditions that many people would like, but he has been returned to the United States, Mr. Abrego Garcia. So I don't want to say that the rule of law is on its death knell. I do think it's important that this administration has cut very close, if not beyond the line, in many legal areas. I could go on about that. Due process is one, in recognizing the due process rights of all migrants in the United States. The attack on birthright citizenship, which is enshrined in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, that basically says if you're born here, you're a U.S. citizen. And a number of other areas too, like deporting people without hearing to South Sudan, even though they have no ties or contacts with South Sudan. So there's a lot of areas where the law has not been abided by, in my view, where courts have intervened in certain circumstances. And I think we do have to let the judicial process play it out before we say that there's a constitutional crisis or the rule of law is in decline. I do think it's important here, when we're thinking about immigration in Los Angeles, is that it is as far back as 1965 when the U.S. government has deployed the National Guard without the request of a state governor or other state official. And that was when President Johnson in 1965 sent in the National Guard to desegregate an institution that had excluded blacks for many generations. This is an instance where the National Guard was sent in without the request of the governor, without the request of local law enforcement. And that's a serious legal problem in many people's eyes.
Adolfo, let me get your response to what Kevin was talking about there. You would agree that people who are being deported do have access to due process?
I do. Yeah. It's a question of what that due process is and the extent of it.
Yeah,
that's
but
what's
if you,
being
take someone, if you take someone in the middle of the night, put them on a plane, fly them out to a gulag in El Salvador, that's not access.
That was a mistake, and that person was returned. There's no question about that.
There are hundreds of people.
Well, they're not hundreds of people. You're not. This program, you're always talking about. You're always trying to pick. As long as human beings are involved in law enforcement, just like doctors make a mistake in malpractice or anything else, you're going to have problems in law enforcement. But the broad swath of people involved here are criminal or certainly here illegally. Now, you had to give me a little license here, since there's always 3 or 4, counting the moderator against 1 on the political views on this program. Number one, let's have us back here with Jeffrey when the Insurrection Act and the President's authority is upheld. I'm convinced of it. They were impeding the enforcement
of ICE. I will agree to that if you'll come back when the court says the Insurrection Act is not applicable.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come back and have that debate, Jeffrey. You're on.
We can have that debate either way it goes.
Yeah, exactly. But once it's final and decided, you will see that that's just absolutely lawful and it will be upheld. Secondly, as to Jeffrey's point, more specifically, is yes, of course, I'm for protest. But protest, and as Imani was speaking, you had images showing a fire, cars being burned. Oh, that's just a few people. Stores being looted. Again, it was the Democrat mayor of the city that called for a curfew. It was the police chief, who's not a Republican, that said he was overwhelmed before the president introduced this. Now, we could have adopted this, the model that that foolish governor, Tim Walz, did of Minnesota. Have a police precinct overrun, have the city burned, and then call in the National Guard. There's an expression that's used often, nip it in the bud. That's exactly why that expression applies here. President Trump did what he had to do, restore law and order. Now, Imani, you're absolutely right. People voted for mass deportations. People voted for deportations. Now, Jeffrey had the economic argument and so forth. The election decided that.
There is a legal...
The election decided. You're trying to hang it on a case here or there on due process, which we can talk about.
Right.
But you're talking fundamentally, the people on this program are upset because the policies they believe in are not the policies that the American people decided that needed to be implemented, and their president is doing.
Okay, let me.
I can be very clear. I'm upset because I just want that same energy all the way around.
But you agree that people voted for this?
100%. But my point also is, again, I just want the same energy that was given towards January 6 rioters. Let's just apply that same energy to other things.
That's a good point.
Do that?
Why did Mayor Bowser not take up the president when he offered 10,000 troops that day? That's the first energy we need to look at.
The first
president
question
offered
is, why
the National
did
Guard.
Donald Trump
President Trump offered resources in a letter. President Trump's officers, and the speaker didn't.
All right, I want to get to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, okay, Jeffrey, I want to get to you. Just one point, Jeffrey. We're talking about what the governor of California did or didn't do. I mean, if we look at the situation, we're looking at a struggle between the power of the state, in this case California, and the federal government. I mean, does this have the makings of some kind of a constitutional crisis on who does what, can do what?
I think it's only a constitutional crisis if one party or the other decides not to obey what the courts say. Then it becomes a constitutional crisis. But I want to correct a couple of things. The 10,000 troops that were offered by Donald Trump prior to January 6th were offered, and they were supposed to be Army troops, were to be offered because, as he put it in his request, I want to protect my people.
So what? They'd be there.
The people that were there to rally for him.
Why did they agree with him?
There would be other people there that would do harm to them. Adolfo, stop.
Troops are troops.
The bottom line is that that's the way that the request went.
So it's for you, it's semantics.
In this particular case, the National Guard could have been called out by Newsom if he wanted them.
Yeah.
And do what Waltz did.
They were his troops.
And do what Waltz did.
They did not need to be national.
Yeah, burn down the city and then call the National Guard.
Okay, one moment. Okay.
And in fact, the police chief asked for help from Los Angeles County and from other police departments within Los Angeles County.
It's not the police.
He got them.
The police chief's role is not to ask for the National Guard. He said
I want to get to Kevin. Kevin, as Adolfo told us right at the beginning of the program, that a lot of this is political. Are Republicans going to pay a political price for what is going on?
Oh God, what a question.
Let's hear the answer.
I want to emphasize something about elections. There was an election, and we have a president. We have laws that should be enforced. But I don't think the voters thought that they were going to elect a president who didn't abide by the law. So I do think it's important that the rule of law applies here. I think in the long run, and this is the very long run, this immigrant rights versus immigrant enforcement debate will be decided in the annals of history. In California, which was once a very Republican state, we passed what was known as Proposition 187 in 1994 that would have thrown undocumented students out of the public schools and done other things. There was a political reaction to that. There was voting drives. There were naturalization campaigns. The legislature turned from Republican to Democrat. Pete Wilson, who's championed Proposition 187, was a Republican who's now no longer very visible in the Republican Party. And California is now a firmly blue state and has declared itself to be a sanctuary state. I think in the long run, these attacks on immigrants, which often are viewed, particularly in California, as attacks on Latinos, will backfire in the long run, have a national a change of heart, I would hope, so that we don't see kinds of lossless action like we're seeing now.
I have to say something to answer this directly.
Yeah.
Since many of the people here, I'm sure, are fans of CNN. Have you seen the CNN poll on immigrant Latino voters? They were plus 32 for Biden in 20. They're plus 8 for Trump today. This is this week. There was a 40-point swing with. You answered your question about the midterms, answered about Latino voters.
Right.
The problem is the hard left, which is represented, frankly, with all due respect on this program, they live in their bubble. You're out of sync with the American people. They voted for this, Imani's right, and Latinos, immigrants, voters, people voting, are now up 40% swing in CNN polling.
Okay.
What does that tell you?
Adolfo, did not vote for they did not vote for people to be swept up without due process. They absolutely voted for stricter immigration.
Yes, I agree. I agree with the due process.
But there is, as we have seen very recently, that the head of Latinos for Trump, other people have come out and said, wait a minute, yes, we voted. Yes, we are conservative. Yes, we have conservative values, but we did not expect this. I sit back and say, you got what you voted for. This is what you wanted. Now y'all gonna have to deal with it in the courts. But again, not everybody is happy with where we are right now.
Not everybody, but the majority is. And that's what really counts. Yes, the majority. Every poll.
Let me go very quickly to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I've got a minute. Go ahead.
Okay. They are not happy about it. The polls that have come out recently, and I cited earlier, 80% or better of the people in the United States are not in favor of this type of conduct as it relates to even illegal immigrants who are working within the system and are good citizens who are working and paying taxes and doing all of those things. They don't want to see children who were born in this country deported because their parents are being deported. They don't want people who marry American citizens and have lived here for a long time being deported and having to leave their families. They're overwhelmingly against this type of conduct. The idea is, and I think
Jeffrey, could the president have made it clear?
Stricter immigration laws, but they didn't want this.
Could the president have made it clear in November that he was deporting people who are here illegally?
Okay,
could he have been clearer?
I am going to have to stop there because we have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington.